Welcome to Technovation. I'm your host, Peter High. My guest today is Anil Cheriyan. Anil is the Executive Vice President of Strategy and Technology at Cognizant, a roughly $20 billion revenue technology services company. He's had that role for a bit more than 2 years now. Prior to that, he was a Director and Deputy Commissioner of Technology Transformation Services for the U.S. federal government. That followed a 6-year stint as the Chief Information Officer of SunTrust Bank. As someone who's been a CIO and now someone who advises them, I look forward to getting his thoughts on what he's learning on topics like the upcoming economic headwinds, the war for talent, and the great resignation, as well as the future of work. Also, given his business, I'm interested in how he thinks about growth areas for talent globally. Anil, welcome back to Technovation. It's great to see you again.
I'm glad to be here. It's always good to be speaking with you too, Peter.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Well, Anil, I have found, especially during the course of the pandemic and these very complex times where there is so much that is unprecedented, the necessity to be in regular conversation with a number of leaders to understand what are they doing during these times, what hypotheses are they testing, which have been correct, which have not, and translating as best we can into our own organizations those observations that we have from a variety of learned sources, a kitchen cabinet of sorts. And I'm always interested in speaking with you, Anil, as somebody who is himself deeply insightful, but also as someone who is deeply connected. And I thought I've been looking forward to sort of testing a few ideas with you and asking you a few questions regarding observations you've had from recent conversations across your ecosystem, in addition to the ways in which you're processing some of that back into the organization you help lead. And I thought I'd begin with one of the broader topics, which is an assessment of where we are economically here in the U.S. and the extent to which you'd care to offer thoughts abroad. Obviously, yours is a business and your network is a network that is very diverse geographically. What are you seeing as you contemplate where we are economically and the potential headwinds we may be heading into?
That's a great question. As you can imagine, that's something that we're constantly looking at, given what's been going on. Our breadth, as you know, is all over 60 different countries and global, and we have over 350,000 people all over. And most recently, we had a meeting with some of our very senior clients, and really appreciate you joining the meeting as well. So you heard a little bit of what I'm about to say, but given the confluence of a lot of black swan events, as we call it, the whole Ukraine crisis, the energy crisis, the supply chain crisis, and obviously COVID and pandemic and the after effects of that, and it's really been an interesting a few months, as most of us are now grappling with: are we in a recession? Is the recession about to come, or where are we, right? And I think the way I'd put it is that all the signs are there that we are seeing across the board, across the globe, a form of downturn, a form of slowdown, and that's happening across the board. And it might vary a little bit in Europe versus the Americas and so on, but given the negative yield curve, given what's going on with the inflation rates and so on, it's inevitable. There's a little glimmer behind all of that, a little bit of sunlight that I can see there in that rain, and then that's really the unemployment numbers. The unemployment numbers really haven't gone up as much as one would have thought. So there's a little glimmer of hope there. We're not really sure if that's just a number calculation thing, number of people applying for jobs or not. But in our mind, the question is the recession a slow, shallow recession, or is it a deep, long recession? And at this stage, if anyone can give me the answer to that, I'd love to meet him. So I think that's where we are with it.
Yeah, no, fair points. And the extent to which, of course, what's to come isn't fully knowable. I wonder what you're seeing, or even what you're advising as you speak with a number of large companies around the world in terms of preparation for that. Any observations there, please?
Oh, yeah. In fact, that's one of the topics of conversation in the last week that we were just having. and we're in budget season, as you know. Everyone's budgeting, as everyone's they've gone through the strategic planning. They're now looking at their budgets and they're looking at where they should spend in the next year. Almost invariably, folks are looking at their budgets and saying, where is it that we need to be spending from a technology perspective? Where should we be investing? And we're seeing a lot of shifting in terms of priorities to move away from those strategic, longer term, what I call the growth opportunities that perhaps may not be as easily measurable, to much more short term, in-year, real opportunity to measure the value of the investments. So people are really looking at, I think it's a shift in focus. That's what we're beginning to see. Where should they be? Where are they spending is really on those shorter projects. There's a lot of questions on, everyone understands that they need to continue down the path of digital transformation. That's not slowing down. That is continuing to exist. It's just a question of where they're spending. A lot of our clients are also looking at, should they consolidate their vendors? Should they look at efficiency? Should they look at ways in which they can measure that efficiency? A lot of clients have now, having moved to the cloud, suddenly realize that the bill that they're getting from their hyperscalers has been growing, partly because it's just been more expensive, but partly because the consumption rates have gone so high. So they're actually looking at something called FinOps, which is, what are we really getting for the value of the money? And right shoring is another conversation that we're getting into with a lot of our clients. So they look at, should we bring stuff back in-house? Should we still have a captive? Or should we create a captive? Should we create a virtual captive? Should we look at doing work more near shore? There's a lot of those types of conversations that are happening as well. So it's a long-winded answer to your question, but now there is as people get into that potential for a recession, they're really shifting the way in which they're thinking about their spend.
That's very interesting. And yours is a company that is very geographically diverse yourself. And I know it's been very interesting for me to speak with a number of technology leaders across scaled organizations who, in some cases, have been burned by where they happen to have either captives or managed service providers with a preponderance of resources in a single geography. If one's tech team happens to be in Russia or in Ukraine right now, that's a problematic set of circumstances, whereas historically, those are obviously deep talent markets for technology. And I wonder if you have any observations about that in terms of what you're seeing among companies as they look for either greater diversity in terms of the mix to perhaps de-risk the scenarios where they're leaning on a single geography to too great an extent, or if there are other decisions you're seeing starting to rise as a result of some of these perceived risks that need to be mitigated.
Yeah, I think the whole regulatory de-risking, country risk conversations are beginning to really bubble up, especially given Ukraine and what's happening there. China, in terms of more manufacturing, what's been going on there. And the geopolitical environment, given the Ukraine-Russia war, in terms of who is really being supportive of Russians versus Ukrainians, et cetera. There's a little bit of a geopolitical concern there on the part of many, especially here in the West. And as a result of that, there's a lot of conversations on where can we find the right resources, where can we scale up appropriately. And then one thing that perhaps we haven't really talked about a lot is the way of working as you start driving towards more agile, DevOps, pod-based delivery. The way of working has also changed and will continue to change as we do more and more things in a digital fashion. So lots of variables there in terms of where people are then thinking about what we are calling right shoring, or what has been called right shoring. Not just near shoring. Where shoring is the other big term that people are using. But we are actively looking at how does our global delivery network within Cognizant have to exist, and how do we need to be able to share workloads across our global delivery network. And that is really making us build out more capabilities in some of the countries that perhaps we were not that big in. Scaling up right now in terms of technical talent, historically, India has been the place where you can scale really fast. However, other countries are now really picking up steam in Romania, as it were, Mexico, Brazil, the Philippines. There's a lot of opportunities to grow technical talent there.
Do you see, Anil, any sorts of points of differentiation from one geography to another in terms of the kinds of work that's done or best suited for certain geographies, given the way in which they're educated, the companies that tend to do business there, and therefore special depth in a certain industry or not? Or are they becoming a bit more overlapping in terms of their areas of expertise?
Yeah, it's traditionally a concept that everyone had where you'd go to India for technical resources, you'd go to the Philippines to do outsourcing of business processes, contact centers, and so on. And then you go to places like Romania and Ukraine for pure engineering talent. But now I think there's a little bit of a blurring of that in terms of what you can find, and there's a transition that's going on in terms of where people are wanting to spend their time, where people, there's a lot of the traditional Indian outsourcers used to do a lot of the traditional waterfall types of projects, large outsourcing, what we call AMS projects, where you're basically managing and maintaining systems. However, there's a huge push to drive towards much more of that agile at speed types of technology, full stack engineers, as it were, even in those places. So there is a little bit of a blurring. And that's what we find as we start building our global delivery networks. How can we create the same kind of methodology across the board and figure out a way in which we can operate across kind of seamlessly across those different delivery centers?
Yeah, very interesting. I wanted to also ask you a related topic. You alluded to it earlier, and I wanted to double click on it further, and that is the war for talent. That ironically, in some ways, given the fact that it appears as though we are headed into some economic headwinds, as aforementioned, as you also alluded to, the unemployment figures remain remarkably low, especially here in the U.S. and in some other major economies as well. I wonder what your own assessment of that is. Obviously, this is unusual given where we are now. Do you feel in some ways that it's kind of a representation of the fact that the last predicted recession, when the pandemic, at the outset of the pandemic, which of course, if you were an airline or a hospitality company or a restaurant company, was profound, but for many others, they actually grew at faster rates than they even anticipated at the end of 2019. And therefore, there was this sort of false storm, if you will, that they believe they were heading into that didn't exist. That perhaps there's a hope indeed, but also maybe even a bit of an expectation as a result of that one needs to make sure they're not letting go of valuable resources without yet understanding the depth, as you pointed out, the depth and the pace with which we will get through what may be an economic headwind to come.
Yeah, no, that's very much the different factors at play here. If you go back to the original premise that is if a recession is coming, which everybody feels there is one, and the depth of it is not that clear, the pace at which people are still driving technology projects has not slowed down. That is still in existence. So there's no, and I see that across industries as well. So the question is, are people going to get hit with that at some point or not? And so the war for talent continues to rage because of the pace at which the demand is still there. The demand is still strong. Now, on the supply side, where there has been the great resignation, there have been people leaving, balancing demand and supply has really been the war for talent. People have been hiring like crazy, and we ourselves have continued to hire at a pretty rapid pace. We hire over 150,000 people a year across the globe, and that's just to keep in pace with that demand supply deficiency here. So I think it's going to continue at that pace. But given the fact that the fear of recession has perhaps slowed down some of the hiring in some of the hyperscalers, for example, or some of the captives are reconsidering should they be hiring as many as they should. The level of resignations that we're seeing has begun to slow down a little bit. And is that going to slow down, or is that going to make this war for talent decline in some shape or form? We're not sure. My own belief is that it'll continue for some period of time. This is a 2 or 3 quarter war that's going to continue, and then who knows what happens after that? Are we deep in a deep recession, or are we kind of coming out? Hopefully, we're coming out at the end of that. But you're absolutely right. I think there's various behaviors that are taking place at this point. People are hoarding resources, even if they may not need them. People are hiring ahead of the curve, as it were, so that when we do pick back up, just imagine at the COVID times, a lot of the airlines and the hospitality companies just stopped working, and they had to fire a lot of their people. I mean, lay off a lot of their people. And when things started picking back up, they had to scramble. They had to scramble for resources. I know a lot of our clients in the hospitality industry were scrambling, so they don't want to go through that same catch-up mode, depending on the size of the recession here.
Yeah, you mentioned briefly there, Anil, the scale of your own hiring, which is really remarkable. The number of people you need to add to your staff in order to keep up with growth. Is there any difference in the kinds of people that you are hiring, whether it's the skills that you're looking for? You talked a little bit about the geographic mix. I wonder the extent to which there's, a greater emphasis in certain parts of the world, for instance. Any new insights as to where you all are directing those efforts of the very large scale hiring that you're in the throes of?
Yeah, one of the things we pride ourselves on is our ability to onboard, train, and grow resources. And that's a machine in Cognizant. That has been a machine that Cognizant is very famous for. And so one of the ways in which we're driving up the pace of fighting the war for talent, as it were, is to hire a lot of folks who are more junior and coming in straight from college. And we have that machine and the ability to train them. So when you talk about 150,000 people that we're hiring, probably a third of those are college hires. And it's the mix that we have. It also adjusts our pyramid to some extent. So we have an ability to leverage stronger, more experienced resources with more junior resources as well. So the mix from an experience base is changing. There's always the need for full stack engineers, especially as we start doing large scale digital programs, working with and more from an agile standpoint. The need for those who are more able to deal with the agile DevSecOps operations. That is also something that the old mainframe waterfall technologists, there's still a need for them, but it's not as high as the other. So there's the skill levels are changing quite a bit, and the skill mixes are changing quite a bit. But it really puts a lot of onus on us to train, onboard, and really ensure that our associates are ready for the work that's lying ahead of them, the new type of work that's lying ahead of them.
Yeah, wow, that scale is really remarkable to contemplate. Related to that as well, the future of work continues to be, I find anyway, Anil, this evergreen topic because it is fast evolving. And though it seems as though most people, at least here in the US, have reconciled themselves to the fact that there will be some degree of hybrid work that continues now, whether that means more time in the office and less virtually, or the reverse, and the stances that organizations will take about the liberty that employees have as to what that mix looks like and when they come in certainly is evolving. but it strikes me as sort of this ongoing set of hypotheses that continue to be tested and with course corrections along the way based upon what's working and what isn't. I would love your observations, Anil, and the extent to which you have any that are representative of some of the differences geographically speaking, where you are seeing anything that is particularly striking. I'd love to hear from you about that.
Yeah, it's really an interesting phenomenon. I'm not sure. I talked to most of our clients about this return to office concept, and in terms of where are we and what do they see, and most companies were drawing lines in the sand in the last year to say, okay, from June on, we're all going to come back to the office, or from July on, we're going to have 3 days a week hybrid. Hybrid work, et cetera, et cetera. That drawing lines in the sand has just not really worked out. And it's fundamentally because the employee power or the value that the employees feel they have now, given the war for talent, given the need for all of these resources, that has shifted significantly from employer to employee. Now, is that going to continue along that path or not? If there is a massive recession, perhaps that's going to change. But who knows? Who knows where that's going to go? But at this point, our approach in Cognizant has been very much let's deal with it more from a client base. Let's deal from it more from an organization or a management level decision. A team level decision, as it were, and let's be as flexible as possible, because we can't afford to have our associates not want to join us if we put hard and fast rules. We're also looking at ways, and this varies really by country, in terms of the level of commute that people need to have. If you're living in a town like Bangalore and you're 15 miles away from your office, the commute can be 3 hours long. And you don't want to have people commuting 3 hours every day. And that's just going to take away from their productivity. So it really varies based on whether you're in an urban center or if you're in some of the other centers. It becomes a really difficult conversation to say, we want you back 5 days a week or 3 days a week or whatever. The only other twist to all of this is, a lot of our clients and ourselves are figuring out ways in which we can bring people back to office around moments that matter. Moments such as a new collaboration approach that we need to have, or a communication deal, or a celebration deal. There's ways in which we need to construct the return to office to be around what we call moments that matter, moments that really make some sense, rather than blindly having this diktat that says, thou shalt return to office, and then have everybody sit in the office and be on Zoom calls or Teams calls, whatever. So it's really changing quite a bit. Is it going to evolve even further? I feel, being a little bit old-fashioned myself, the need to have people in rooms together is paramount to building a culture of a company, and we have to figure out a way to do this, and we have to figure out a way to make that work. And all of these, the last few months and the next few months, are going to be experimentation around coming up with the right answer as far as that's concerned.
Well, Anil Cheriyan, thank you so much for sharing some perspectives representative of the collaborations you have with a great number of technology and digital chiefs. It's been great to get your perspective, and by extension theirs. Appreciate you sharing them.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me, Peter.